Well, I guess the music stopped, which means that it's about time for us to kick off our 47th annual conference. Gosh, it's so hard to believe that it's been half a century since we have been discussing financial inclusion, community development, and financial and racial inequality. It is a sobering reminder of the magnitude of the challenges we're trying to address and a recognition of how ingrained and systemic these issues really are. Well, buckle up, because today and tomorrow we'll have an incredible slate of speakers that will address these tough social, racial, and economic justice issues that are part of the DNA of our movement of community development, CDFI certified, and minority designated credit unions. You will hear from legislators who have been incredible supporters of our work and see CDFIs in general and mission-driven credit unions in particular as a key part of the solution to create a financial system that works for all. You will also learn from experts, practitioners, and leaders in the field about how we can use this historic moment to bring about lasting changes to communities left behind by the financial mainstream. You will also have the opportunity to participate and network with your peers. We invite you to share your thoughts through the chat and help us amplify the message through social media. Let's also pause for a moment and reflect on those lost to the pandemic. Our thoughts also to the people of Louisiana and elsewhere where natural disasters, amplified by climate change, are bringing untold devastation and suffering. Kudos to our fellow credit unions that are going, as we always do, above and beyond to bring relief and hope. We are the financial first responders.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends out west. Before we get into our agenda for today, I'm just going to go into a little bit of housekeeping. We're really excited to welcome you all here today, and we're really excited for what we have in store. You will find the agenda for these 2 days of the conference under the agenda menu tab on the upper left-hand corner of the conference website page. Once you're logged in on the conference website at advancednetlabs.org/inclusive, and once you're logged in, you can get back to that home screen by hovering over the home menu tab. I also recommend that when you log in, you check the Remember Me checkbox when logging in, and this will make it easier if you need to get back in later on this week. Speaker bios are online in the Speakers tab. Again, this is on the conference website. And also on the upper left-hand corner of the conference site to the right of the agenda. If you have any technical difficulties, and this information is in the chat, please email emsupport@advancednetlabs.org or click on the support bubble on the bottom right-hand side of the conference website page. Now, this support bubble is an icon that is black and looks like a water droplet or a leaf shape. And again, it's in the bottom right-hand corner of the conference website. We'll be using the hashtag CDCUCon 2021 to track and continue discussions during these 2 days. And again, we'll post that in the chat. And we encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to follow along on Facebook and Twitter at Inclusive CDCUs and LinkedIn at Inclusiv, and to keep the conversation going with your fellow conference attendees. Post-conference, videos of all the sessions will be up by October 11th on Inclusiv's YouTube channel at Inclusive CU Network. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to present Inclusiv's President and CEO, Cathie Mahon.
Thank you, Jules, and welcome everybody to our 47th annual conference. Y quiero decir bienvenidos a todos los participantes en Puerto Rico y en otros lugares a la conferencia de Inclusiv 47. So we are so thrilled to have everybody here. And as you've heard from Pablo and Jules, we have just a fabulous lineup for you for the next day and a half. I have the great honor and privilege of introducing our opening speaker, Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Congresswoman Waters was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and is currently serving her 16th term in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 43rd Congressional District of California. Congresswoman Waters is a fearless and outspoken advocate for women, children, people of color, and the poor. A longtime champion of credit unions and CDFIs, she was instrumental in leading the fight to get resources for MDIs and CDFIs, including fighting for the $12 billion investment in CDFIs and MDIs in last year's Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. As many of you know in the audience, that $12 billion investment was historic, and we are just at the very early stages of being able to access that capital and put it to use in the communities that we serve. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
I would like to begin by thanking you for inviting me to participate in your annual conference. I would also like to personally thank Inclusiv's President and CEO, Cathie Mahon, for her leadership and contributions to my committee's efforts to support community development financial institutions and minority depository institutions. This includes testifying at one of our field hearings held by Representative Meeks in New York last year, and serving on the Community Development Finance Advisory Board that Senator Warner and I formed to build on our success last December in securing an unprecedented $12 billion in capital investments and grants to support CDFIs and MDIs. So thank you for allowing me to say a few words about the importance of investing much needed capital in communities of color across this country. I would also like to thank Inclusiv's membership of community development credit unions for your hard work in the past year. We all know that Black and Latinx communities were among the hardest hit during this pandemic. Your diverse network of mission-driven institutions has been instrumental in ensuring that critical aid reaches consumers and small businesses, especially those in vulnerable communities and those in dire need during the pandemic. Your work did not go unnoticed. I want you to know that I'm very familiar with the key roles CDFIs play in providing a capital and investment lifeline to communities of color. Over 40 years ago, I worked with CDFIs in my home state of California and was the founding director of the CDFI Pacific Coast Regional Corporation. The lessons I learned back then are critical today. Since the onset of the pandemic, my committee worked tirelessly to ensure that CDFIs and MDIs received critical dollars to support small businesses and minority-owned businesses. We saw discrimination in the Paycheck Protection Program, where many of the biggest banks neglected small and often minority-owned businesses for their wealthier clients. In the second PPP round, I secured a $60 billion set-aside for community lenders, including credit unions, CDFIs, and MDIs, to provide PPP loans. As part of the December 2020 pandemic response package, we authorized a historic $12 billion in capital investments and grants to support MDIs, and CDFIs. In June, I joined Vice President Kamala Harris, Senator Mark Warner, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to announce the release of the initial $1.25 billion in funds provided to CDFIs. Furthermore, as part of the American Jobs Act, we provided $10 billion to renew Treasury's State Small Business Credit Initiative, that is the SSBCI, to allow basically financial institutions, including CDFIs and MDIs, to participate in state, territory, and tribal programs to provide up to $100 billion in new loans and investments in small and minority-owned businesses. These programs and dollars will help our communities recover. But our work is not done. As a result of decades of discriminatory practices like redlining, which resulted in the financial exclusion of people of color, traditional banks can sometimes see Black and Latinx communities a rending risk and refuse to make loans to them. As chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee, I'm looking at this issue closely. Further this year, I held a hearing with the megabank CEOs. I held them accountable by asking them tough questions about their support for vulnerable communities through the pandemic and their commitments to racial equity as their companies see record profits this year. But beyond continuing to keep the pressure on megabanks to do their part, we must also ensure that we continue to provide capital and other support to CDFIs and MDIs that serve communities of color. This includes parts of my comprehensive legislation that promoting and advancing communities of color through Inclusive Lending Act that would strengthen MDIs through partnerships with larger financial institutions, technical assistance, and ensuring opportunities for MDIs to hold government deposits. So thank you again for your work and for all of your efforts during this crisis. I look forward to continue partnering with your organization in the months to come. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Congresswoman, for those fabulous and inspiring remarks. And as many of you know, we have such a tremendous champion in Congress, really fighting for not just the institutions that we work in, but the communities that we serve. And I think certainly the network of credit unions, CDFIs, MDIs have really proven over the past 18 months just how important we are to the full functioning of our economies. Thank you so much. You know, I want to take a minute and just say that, you know, this conference and the work of Inclusiv would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. So I'd like to take a minute and thank our sponsors and exhibitors for the conference, including CUNA Mutual Group, Citi, National Cooperative Bank, Equifax, Experian, the African American Credit Union Coalition, Agent IQ, the NCUA, and NeighborWorks America. Inclusiv is pleased that we will be partnering with NeighborWorks not only as a conference sponsor, but later in the program, we'll have comments from NeighborWorks America's CEO, Marietta Rodriguez. Along with NeighborWorks America, Inclusiv is also excited to be co-hosting networking sessions along with other partners, including the AACUC, the National Association of Latino Credit Unions and Professionals, or NELCUP, and UNFCU on clean energy lending and serving Black and Hispanic consumers. I encourage everybody to take time in the intermissions to go visit the exhibitor booths. You will not only be thanking them for their support, but you'll be getting some really important and interesting resources and information. So I encourage you to check it out. With that, I am now going to introduce and ask to join me on the stage our two opening speakers, Richard Romero from Seattle Credit Union and Bob Trunzo from CUNA Mutual Group. Hello, Richard and Bob.
Good morning.
Welcome to the conference. Let me just give everybody a rundown of your backgrounds before we get started in our conversation. Richard is the CEO of Seattle Credit Union and the chair of the Inclusiv board. In recent years, he has led his organization to focus on populations that are mostly ignored by financial institutions by becoming a CDFI, a low-income designated credit union, or a LID, and a Juntos Avanzamos credit union. Seattle Credit Union has led the way creating products such as citizenship loans, I-10 real estate loans, I-10 auto and personal loans, as well as low down payment loans that assist homebuyers in affordable housing. Bob Trunzo is the CEO of CUNA Mutual Group. A native of Louisville, Kentucky, Mr. Trunzo became the 8th president and chief executive officer of CUNA Mutual Group on January 1st, 2014. It's quite a New Year's Day you had that year, Bob. The company is a mainstay of the credit union industry with $3.5 billion in annual revenue, is located in Madison, Wisconsin. But one of the interesting things I learned in researching your background, Bob, is that among your many career accomplishments, you served as Secretary of Commerce under Wisconsin Governor Tommy Thompson. Both of you have been leading voices over the past few years for the importance, the opportunity, and the imperative of building greater diversity, equity, and inclusion into the credit union industry and using the credit union industry as vehicles for change. This conference, as you know, is all about building more inclusive economies. And I thought it would be a great way for us to start to be talking a little bit about your various journeys, each of your journeys on that process. So I'd love to maybe first kick it over to you, Richard, and ask you to discuss a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing around the DEI space and a little bit about your your personal journey to get there and how you've seen this as an opportunity for transforming your institution.
Sure, thank you, Cathie. And I'll start by saying that it's been a long journey. I'd say it's probably, the years are flipping by so quickly, probably about an 8-year journey so far. And, you know, the journey started from really a business perspective and then kind of an inward reflection. So it was two pieces for me. One, how do I differentiate our credit union in a saturated market? And two, you know, how do I take my career and make a difference in the community? And it was a challenge for me because, you know, I have an extensive banking background, but I'd never done low income or community development work. So I didn't know where to start at all. And I remember reaching out to a good friend of mine who was the CEO of a credit union in Northern California, Richard Cooper. I'm sure many of you know him, and asked him, what's this, you know, low income work about? And Richard Cooper had a credit union that was CDFI and LID, and he started explaining it to me. And it was like learning a foreign language for me. It was something I'd never done or really looked into. And I think the ball really started rolling there and then really picked up steam when he said, you need to talk to Pablo. And I'm like, who's Pablo? What's Pablo? And he's like, Pablo de Felipe, you need to talk to him. And so we connected. And I remember having breakfast with Pablo near the SeaTac airport and him basically telling me the road that I needed to go down to. And before I knew it, we had become a Juntos Avanzamos credit union. We had become a low-income designated credit union and then a CDFI credit union. And, you know, I think Inclusiv really for giving me the sounding board and the resources to try to figure out how to do this. But the journey is complicated because it wasn't a matter of just making the decision to become focused on low-income communities. the biggest question was, how do I rally an organization around it, starting from the board all the way down to the front lines? And that's a evolving journey. I needed to make sure I had the board's buy-in. I needed to make sure I had the management team's buy-in, and I needed to make sure that the credit union itself was prepared to be able to handle these communities, because a lot of times most of the time they're communities of color, and require different ways to communicate, different types of empathy, and different kinds of training and education for the credit union. So I'll pause there, and that's kind of the beginning of the journey that I went through.
I love it that so many roads begin and end with Pablo. And I often say, if most inclusive members, you've either come by way of Pablo or Pamo, and so it bears out. And I love also the fact that you use the term "before I knew it," which is a little bit about what happens in Inclusiv. Is before you know it, you're immersed in all kinds of different ways that you can be pursuing this journey and really converting your institution into a vehicle for change in your communities. And you've done such an admirable job doing that. And now lending your voice and leadership to our organization has been really critical. And Bob, you've really had an amazing kind of story over, many years, no doubt, but certainly in the last year and a half, I feel like you have been, or last several years, you've really been such an incredible voice in the credit union industry at large, really as a leader driving diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And in so many ways, really bringing a tremendous depth and authenticity to that work. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that experience that CUNA Mutual Group went through, from your kind of the initial, aha moments through how you've become such a impassioned leader and a real influencer in the broader credit union movement.
Thank you, Cathie. It's a pleasure to be here today. And Richard, I'm honored to share the initial 2 spots in the conference with you. So good to see both of you. I was struck, Cathie, by what Richard said about the journey. And let me be really clear, it's a journey. And it's kind of 2 steps forward, maybe a step sideways, maybe a step back, but you're always trying to move forward in this. And for us, for our company, for me personally, if you start with kind of our premise at CUNA Mutual, we believe everybody should have the opportunity for a brighter financial future. I mean, that's a given on what we do. That's what drives us. We want that to happen. So I think as you look at our journey, it was, and I'll go back to what Richard said, which I thought was something we talk about. Being inclusive, driving DE&I change, it's good for our business. And why is it good for our business? It's simply good for the following reasons. Number one, we want to be relevant to everyone, have to be relevant to everyone. Number two, this organization, this company, which credit union leaders support, which credit union members are a very critical part of, what credit unions are a part of, we have a large balance sheet. We want to use that balance sheet to move the industry forward. I just spoke to a bunch of credit unions this morning in Madison, smaller size credit unions in assets, every bit as important as the largest ones. And what I told them is, you want a strong CUNA Mutual, and you want a financially strong CUNA Mutual, because it allows us to drive these kinds of issues that are so important to the industry. And let me tell you, at the end of the day, our purpose is to provide financial opportunity for everyone, and it comes in different shapes and forms, and not everybody has equal access to it. And our goal is to, if we can do some things, Cathie, around making products easier to understand for consumers, making them more available, and you have to do that in the very communities you all talk about and you serve. I'll just end with one thing. You know, you mentioned my involvement as a Commerce Secretary for Governor Thompson. You know, we always used to get headlines when we'd attract business to the state of Wisconsin, but all of us knew that the most lasting economic development, the most lasting change, the most lasting impact was the community development happening at the grassroots level, anchored by a credit union, anchored by a CDFI, anchored by the very people who are engaged in the community. And I think that's what I'm so proud of in our journey too, is our foundation, our employees, our legislative teams, everybody's engaged in driving that kind of development, which I think is, look, not only is it critical, but in my view, that's the most everlasting economic development change. And we like it, we participate in it, and we're going to continue to participate in it.
That's so wonderful. You know, I know you both heard the remarks of Congresswoman Waters at the opening, where she talked a little bit about her vision from, you know, where she was sitting in Washington and you know, in the Capitol during the early days of the pandemic, and the frustration of feeling that critical resources like Paycheck Protection Program dollars were not getting out into communities, and especially communities like the one that she serves and represents, but also so many communities that are well served by credit unions. I wonder if either of you have thoughts about kind of what have we learned about the value and importance of not just sort of continuing to build up the credit union movement, which I think we all believe is so important, but this moment in time that the credit union movement really has to demonstrate how we can be partners in being able to get such critical resources out to our communities. I wonder if either of you have reflections on that.
You know, I can tell you one of the most, I hate to use the word shocking, but I guess it was kind of shocking experiences we had during the pandemic was when we decided to start PPP lending, because we're not an SBA lender. And so we were fortunate enough to have someone on staff who did have SBA experience, and just getting the program started was a real big challenge. But what we uncovered was we thought we would just start the program and help the handful of businesses that, you know, we serve and that needed help. And as soon as we opened the doors, we were flooded with businesses that were turned away by larger banks. And that in itself wasn't a huge surprise. But what became really a big surprise was really understanding and seeing firsthand how inequities, especially, you know, when it comes to small businesses, has an impact during a time of disaster. So, you know, it sounded really simple to go and get a PPP loan until we sat down with small businesses and started asking them for tax returns and the documentation that the SBA was requiring, and coming to the stark realization that many of these businesses don't have the resources to have a CPA firm or an accountant. They don't have the education, you know, to have a business plan, to have their financials forecasted, or to understand how to declare income and how to show a loss or a gain. And we had one employee manning the PPP program, and she has spent incalculable number of hours counseling these businesses one-on-one, trying to get their documentation together and such, to the point where we would have to shut off the program every couple of weeks to let her catch up. So to me, you know, the one thing that really shocked me was there's a lot of work to do out there to really shore up these communities, most of them communities of color, that really need technical assistance, technical support, and education and resources. And the one thing that I really believe in that people need to ask themselves questions about is how committed are you to these journeys, right? You can't just simply turn on a program and say, hey, we're going to start doing I-10 lending. And, now we're really helping the underserved, because for the example with I-10 lending, there's so much that goes with it. And that's why we jumped into the Juntos Avanzamos program. It was because it helped prepare us to be able to serve markets in that specific market, the Hispanic market, making sure we were prepared with language, documentation, training, all kinds of different, I think it was 100 different things on that checklist, if I remember correctly. So if credit unions want to go down this journey of really doing what credit unions should be doing, which is putting resources out there for people who don't have access to resources, we need to take a really big step back and really understand where your credit union is. And I think this conference is a perfect example to start that journey going down and getting some education, networking, getting a really clear understanding of what it really takes and what the commitment needs to be in order to serve these communities.
To add to that, Cathie, this was, I was thinking when you asked your question, I was thinking back to, the dark days of March and April and May of last year. And, this was just, I think credit unions and our movement really stood tall. I think credit unions, Richard and others stood up and did the right thing. It was a massive amount of effort to just mobilize forces. And I think what struck me about all this is, you try to do what you can do. And I tell our folks at our company, everything is going around you. You all got to control what you can control. And here's how we contributed, and here's how we helped. We felt like this pandemic, and I think Richard said it, really disproportionately impacted people of color in communities. And basically, we paid out from the start of the pandemic, almost $80 million of COVID claims. Let me tell you something though, what I was most proud about for all the CUNA Mutual employees involved, and there were a lot, 75% of that $80 million plus claims were paid in 10 days or less. So we felt it was extremely important for these communities really hit hard for the beneficiaries to get the dollars, get the payments as quickly as they can without a lot of paperwork. Without a lot, how many times do you hear, geez, I pay all these premiums and something happens and I never hear from my carrier, or this isn't working, they need these 10 documents. Where we could and when we could, with over 70% of these, we just said, let's get the money out, let's get the claims paid as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I will add, most of our staff was home, managing families and other things. So it was an incredibly challenging environment. But I do think, hearing stories about not just Richard's, but what other credit unions did in this time of need and how they treated their members and their communities, you have to be proud to be a part of this movement. I really think, I think we can say at the end of the day, we've all answered the bell.
Sorry. That was a note to say we have a couple minutes before wrapping, and before we do, I think that's it's such a great point, and both of your points make me think about the fact that as the pandemic sort of made so much of our society contract and sort of move indoors, you really saw so much of, so many players kind of stepping in, and I think you both have done such a fabulous job. One of the sort of parting questions I just thought I'd throw out, because you both have, as part of your leadership styles, a tremendous focus on sort of engaging your teams. And I know I know, Bob, you do the Bobcasts, and, you know, you really have, and when I, you know, in the opening remarks, when I started saying the extent to which you've moved into this work with authenticity, it's sort of so apparent and so deep within your workforce at CUNA Mutual Group that you know, that your team, you're really sort of spend a lot of time getting your team to kind of embrace the principles of inclusion. And Richard, I know how deeply you care about that and have been working to really build that culture in your own institutions. I just thought if either of you have parting thoughts on sort of ways in which you think it might be most effective for other leaders to ensure that we're not just thinking at the high level about what inclusion means, but we're really trying to figure out ways to integrate it into the culture of who we are and what we're delivering.
I think it's helped us at CUNA Mutual because all of my senior leadership team, we're all aligned on this issue. And we're all passionate about it. And look, we don't, this is good for our business. We want to use our clout to drive these kinds of issues, which are so important to the country. You know, and look, and I think Richard made it really clear, we are serving segments of the population no one else wants to serve. And you know what? I view that as an honor. It's our ability to provide the kind of products and services, the investment. It's our honor to do that because we just want to make sure at the end of the day, everybody just moves up a little higher and feels more financially secure. I think that, and I think we like doing it with credit unions. We love doing it with Inclusiv. We love doing it with all of our partners. But I have to tell you, and Richard knows this, I mean, this is hard work. And if anything, we're kind of relentless about this, Cathie, at CUNA Mutual. We're not, you know, sometimes when you start stuff, and I know everybody in this conference will joke when I say this, but sometimes when you start initiatives, and our initiatives on this obviously started years ago, like Richard was talking about, you know, it's like, well, are they gonna, you know, does this go on for a year? Is this the flavor of the day? How serious are we? Well, I think we're way past that at CUNA Mutual. And but again, that's what gives you momentum. And we talk about it, and you have to live it. And look, I'm not naive. You know, we get pushed back a little bit, but as I saw Richard nodding, but he and I are always trying to move forward on the issue. That's what you have to do. And I appreciate you all. I know Richard's got a comment. I just appreciate the opportunity to be at this conference and for all of you to understand that you have us as a partner, and you've seen it, and you'll continue to see it in ways that we can show up and as I like to say, row the boat with everybody.
So thank you, Bob. And I need to find out what a Bobcast is. Sounds interesting.
Well, Richard, let me just tell you this. When I retire, I'm going to have a future as a podcaster because I do a broadcast every week to our employees. It started in March of the pandemic. It started just getting everybody settled, and I've become a pseudo radio personality now.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, I'll just close with, to me, it's about intention. You know, how intentional can you be, and how intentional can we be as credit unions? You know, I would challenge credit unions to take a look at this. I started with taking a look at our mission and vision, right? And I use the mission and vision really as a calling card, as a club, as whatever you want to call it, to focus people inside the organization and outside the organization on what we do. And you have to be intentional about DEI. You have to be intentional about inclusion. You have to be present. You have to build the trust in the communities. I, you know, personally attend a lot of the events, as many of the events as I can, just to show that this organization is very serious about it. We didn't send a representative, you know, to a march or to a luncheon. I'm here to represent Seattle Credit Union, and I'm here to represent our movement, because it's not just about my credit union. When I speak a lot about credit unions, that we can make a big difference, but you have to be intentional about it, and you have to be intentional about representation. You have to be intentional about equality. You have to be intentional about being fair, giving opportunity to people who may not have had the same opportunities and just need a hand in order to get into the mainstream of banking. So yeah, my challenge is take a look inward to your organization and make sure that you're completely aligned from top to bottom. And it'll take a while. It's not easy. It took me years, but you'll get there. And I think Inclusiv, I'm a little biased, but I think Inclusiv is a great place to start that journey and really get some good advice and some good training and tools to do that. And we'll put Pablo's number up on the screen here. We should just have it scrolling on the bottom.
Well, thank you both. This has been a credible opening, and thank you both for your thoughtfulness and your remarks. And with that, I am going to kick it back to Pablo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathie, Bob, and Richard. And my phone number is 608-886-7065. Call me anytime. All right, so let's move on. This has been a very inspiring conversation. We're going to continue with highlighting some of this amazing partnership we have with CUNA Mutual. It's now my pleasure to introduce Chris Roy. He's the Senior Vice President of CUNA Mutual Group. He's a colleague and a friend who shares our vision of an inclusive financial system and truly believes in the importance of diversity for our industry. I will not read his very impressive bio, which is available on the program, but I will share that Chris and I were in the same credit union development educator class back to 2006, which is the best class ever. All right, Chris.
Pablo, thanks for the invitation. Congratulations on the 47th annual conference, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be part of this conference. And let's talk about, how this partnership that we've had for many, many years has come to a point where we really believe that we are influencing the industry at a level that we had not seen before. So perhaps you can share with our members, what drove you to, increase our partnership and roll out some of the initiatives that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes.
Sure. I guess first off is I always use this phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. I joined CUNA Mutual 16 years ago. Larry Blanchard is a mentor of mine. And you talk about the long-term relationship between CUNA Mutual Group and Inclusiv, which was then the Federation. And Larry took me to the CUNA GAC. It was like I just had been hired, and the first meeting I ever had in the credit union world was to sit down and to meet and greet the board of the Inclusiv Federation at the time. And I was struck, first of all, on how nice and welcoming everyone was. It was a little intimidating. And also, it left really strong impressions on the work that the credit unions, the community development credit unions do. And, that was the beginning of learnings for me, but I learned about the long-term relationship between Inclusiv and CUNA Mutual Group. And Larry Blanchard continued to bring me along. And so I was a credit union DE class. We met in DE class. And for a long period of time, we've been friends. And you would reach out and ask and talk about opportunities. And in particular, I learned through you, Pablo, the importance of the CDFI certification. And there were some various state opportunities that we helped out on, where Inclusiv took the lead. California, Florida, Kansas comes to mind. And the most recent before the pandemic was the great leadership that you showed down in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria and the needs that were there on the island. And so I want to say all that because that was all there. That relationship, that foundation, the credit union system was there. And I just felt like I was at CUNA Mutual, one of the people to help continue that path. And so I'll pivot to the project at hand. So because of all the learnings that I got from you, Pablo, around CDFIs and from others, and the importance of small credit unions and their community when the pandemic hit, just as Bob Trunzo had mentioned and Congresswoman Maxine Waters, how can we make sure those credit unions continue to thrive and to grow and to help their local communities? And, you know, it was a very, very nerve-wracking time, as we all recall, a lot of questions. And we watched the PPP program, and Richard talked about all the members that stepped up that didn't get access to capital, and that was front and center for us. And we started talking about what else should we be doing to address the needs during this pandemic. And that's where we started talking about advocacy and trying to educate more credit unions about the CDFI project, about the CDFI, and that became a project. So it was the pandemic that spurred us on to kind of supercharge what we had always been talking about and working on over the years.
You know, Chris, that's such a great point, because you know we really increased our efforts around CDFI certification way before, you know, these resources were even a thought in people's minds, right? So I think that that really says a lot about, you know, us kind of, I don't want to say anticipating, but really building the foundations for credit unions to really leverage resources that at this point are really unprecedented. So I wanted to thank you and your colleagues, Susie Reynolds, you know, and everybody else in that team were incredible supporters, and we would have not done what we've done. And just really quickly, I'm going to just share some of the numbers. I mean, we right now are at a historic high of 376 CDFI credit unions. They collectively serve 14 million consumers and have over 130 billion in lending in CDFI target markets. That's huge, and that's something that we need to recognize. And the important thing is that we have even more credit unions that are eligible to participate. So working with you, working with the state leagues, I think that we have come to a level of awareness about the benefits of the CDFI certification that I have never seen before. So I really wanted to thank your leadership and support for getting us to this point.
Yeah, certainly. If I can do a little bit of a shout out for some of the groups at our company that got involved in this. So we, you know, we're working on advocacy issues, and we've got a small advocacy team. I knew something was moving in the right direction when Inclusiv and CUNA Mutual Group sat down with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they came on board to support increased funding for the CDFI fund, outreach to different members of Congress across the political spectrum who were very favorable towards the idea of increasing the CDFI fund. So Congressman Waters talked about the legislation passing, that those provisions had, I would contend, broad bipartisan support. Without her leadership and others, it wouldn't have happened. But I think if I think people would be surprised if they reached out to others across the political spectrum, the type of support that they would get. And then at CUNA Mutual on the project, we had resources that you mentioned, Susie Reynolds and her project team working closely with you and Inclusiv on a project to educate more credit unions about CDFI certification. And you gave us a target list to reach out to all these various credit unions that might be likely candidates. And I approached our sales team, and our select sales team agreed to make those phone calls out to all those credit unions. Susie Reynolds had her team that was, there weren't like during the pandemic, people were kind of like sitting around, right? And so then all of a sudden, these leaders at our company were willing to give up resources to partner with Inclusiv. And I think you're very aware of that work, including the instructional videos that were mentioned. And I think maybe you want to talk a little bit more about those instructional videos in general that Inclusiv is working on.
Absolutely, and thank you so much again, Chris. Yes, and this is a perfect lead into an announcement that we want to make. Those videos that you are talking about have become the foundation for a concept that we are launching. Is our CDFI Learning Center. So with all, with so many newly certified credit unions, we believe that there's a need for credit union leadership to really understand the implications of being a CDFI, and how to maintain that certification, the opportunities, but also the obligations that come with it, right? So this training program that our CDFI team, and I will introduce here our CDFI Programs Director, Cristel Martinez, and Terry Rattigan, our CDFI guru, someone who everyone knows, but they have been working very hard with the University of New Hampshire's Carsey Center for Impact Finance to develop this curriculum. And the idea here is to have a community development program that really goes deeper into what it means to be a CDFI and how you can actually leverage all the resources, but also the real business model that is behind being a CDFI. So more details will go out soon. Just stay tuned and take advantage of this new resource that not only seeks to educate our industry about the CDFI certification, but also we really want to create a community of practitioners that can support each other and increase our impact, both in CDFI target markets, but also within the credit union industry. So Chris, thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it.
It's an honor. And Pablo, you do, I know everyone's giving you accolades. You do awesome work. You're such an affirming, positive person and such a great person to partner and work with. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, and we are on time, and I'm very happy about that. It's sometimes a bit hard to maintain that, but now I'm going to introduce Jodie Harris, the director of the CDFI Fund, who has been such an incredible partner of Inclusiv. Again, I will not go over her bio, which can be found on the conference program, but I want to share that she joined the U.S. Treasury Department in 2007 and has been instrumental in the shaping of our CDFI Fund, right? We are certainly lucky to have someone with her expertise and commitment to community development leading the fund during these unprecedented times when CDFI's true potential is being recognized by both the public and private sector. Jodie, we really appreciate your leadership. A special shout out to the work and support that you have given to the cooperativas in Puerto Rico. But thank you again for your partnership and for your commitment to the work.
Great, thank you, Pablo. And it's great to follow all of this fantastic discussion about partnerships and strengthening of the CDFI network and the credit unions in particular. And I'm very happy. I can also say that I learned about credit unions from Pablo, so I'm part of the Pablo fan club as well. But I should also thank Cathie and the rest of the Inclusiv team for inviting me to participate in another Inclusiv conference. So it's an honor to be here. And for those of you who I don't know and I haven't met, as Pablo said, I'm Jodie Harris, the director of the CDFI Fund with the U.S. Department of the Treasury. And we are going to be joined by a CDFI Fund staff panel tomorrow. We'll have Andrew Slack, our acting program manager for the CDFI Fund program. We'll have Heather Hunt, who's our program manager for compliance. And we'll have Marcia Seigel, who's the Deputy Director for Policy and Programs, on a panel tomorrow, and they'll get in much more detail about the programs than I will today. But what I'd like to do is just give you an overview of what we've been working on and continue this discussion about the plethora of resources that are coming to us with bipartisan support and, of course, support from industry partners like Inclusiv. 2021 has been a very busy year for the CDFI Fund, and we have one more quarter of the calendar year to go, and we are still moving along at full speed. There were a number of things that happened this year. We opened and awarded the $1.25 billion in the Rapid Response Program. We launched our inaugural round of the Small Dollar Loan Program. We awarded our highest level ever under the Capital Magnet Fund of $175 million. And for those of you interested in the Capital Magnet Fund, we just opened the 21 round, under which we will have $380 million available. We've also awarded $5 billion under our New Markets Tax Credit Program. This is the first $5 billion under a 5-year extension of the program at the $5 billion level. In addition to all that, we are continuing running our other programs, Bank Enterprise Award Program, the Bond Guarantee Program, CDFI, and NACA. In particular, I'd like to share that the bulk of 2021 was focused on the stimulus funding that Congresswoman Waters and others have referred to this afternoon. Much of our time through 2021 was consumed by the need to open, evaluate, and award funding under the CDFI Rapid Response Program, or RRP, as many of you know it. It is with such a great sense of accomplishment that I can say in June, the CDFI Fund awarded the $1.25 billion to 863 CDFIs. This was the largest number of awards made by the CDFI Fund under a single program round. And it was also the quickest program round ever administered by the CDFI Fund. We moved from opening through application review and evaluation to award announcement in less than 4 months. In total, there were 244 credit unions that received more than $400 million in rapid response program funding. If you look at the context of all the certified CDFIs and the certified number of credit unions, that was over 70% who received an award. I think that just goes to show the commitment of credit unions to access funding to deploy critical resources, particularly at a time when it was needed most. There's also another $1.75 billion that was authorized under the state stimulus funding. And this is to support lending in minority communities and minority lending institutions that are addressing the economic impact of COVID-19. As you can imagine, funds at this level take time to make available. We're still developing the policies, procedures, and systems necessary to structure the funding blueprint. And what is included in that is also a definition of accountability around what statute calls a minority lending institution. Treasury leadership at all levels are following our efforts, and they're really working closely with us to make sure that this $1.75 billion is directed toward the communities that desperately need additional resources. Those communities that was said in the earlier discussions are still struggling to recover from the initial shock of the pandemic, as well as weather this current episode with the surge in the virus, as well as continued unemployment and closures of our small businesses. There are several communities around the country that desperately need CDFIs, especially credit unions, to offer the banking and products and lending services that we need. I'm going to pivot a little bit to the program that most of you are familiar with, CDFI program and the Native CDFI program. And just mention that earlier this month, we announced $24 million in the Technical Assistance Award portion of their program. We awarded $24 million to 191 organizations. And of that 191 organizations, 49% were credit unions, and 44 of those groups were cooperatives. Again, it just shows how committed CDFI credit unions are to accessing needed resources to develop programs and services for your communities. And the TA component, of course, is for those who are also emerging. So there are a number of groups out there who are really looking towards certification and for government resources to help develop their programs and services. Now, I mentioned that that was the Technical Assistance Award portion for a reason. There's also the financial assistance portion, which we separated out and will announce later this year. One of the reasons for doing that is because the team that stood up the Rapid Response Program was also responsible for reviewing our CDFI program awards, and they have done an extraordinary amount of work. And so separating the two awards allows us time to really focus and be thoughtful about our work. So we'll have the Financial Assistance Program awards out shortly. Another program that many of you have likely paid attention to and or applied is the Small Dollar Loan Program. Later this month, we anticipate announcing the awards under that inaugural program. The program was authorized by the Dodd-Frank Act, and it provides financial assistance in the form of grants for loan loss reserves and technical assistance to enable CDFIs to establish and maintain small dollar loan programs. I can say that we had 81 organizations apply, and they all requested more than 26 million. Of those 81 organizations, we had 26 applications from credit unions. So I'm excited to see the results of that program. Now I'd like to touch a little bit on just some organizational changes in the CDFI fund. It's important to note that I mentioned Heather Hunt will be participating on the panel tomorrow. And Heather is now the program manager for our compliance unit. Many of you will know our lovely acronym CCME, and that was the Certification Compliance Monitoring Evaluation Unit. We have separated those units into compliance and certification. So those of you who work with Michelle Dickens will be pleased to know that she is the new program manager of the certification unit, and Heather is the program manager of the compliance unit. We also have a number of staff serving in acting program manager roles for financial strategies and research, for the Capital Magnet Fund, and for the CDFI program. And I don't think I could close out updates on the CDFI fund without mentioning certification. We started certification some time ago, and we thank you and Inclusiv and all of the credit union members who contribute and continue to contribute ideas and thoughts around how certification could be considered for credit unions. We're still working out all of the policy issues that we received comments on, and we're still working on a new application, and we will likely debut a new application in 2022. It will not be 2021, but it'll be 2022. But as of now, all certification policies, all target market amendments, all the policies in place still stand. So if you are seeking certification or you're planning to submit a target market amendment, please follow the current policies. And I'll give a special thank you to Terry, who has been working closely with our certification team to make sure that those applications get processed. So I'll wrap it up here to say that without a doubt, we are in the midst of a watershed moment for CDFIs and the CDFI fund. The panelists before me and Congresswoman Warder talked about the number of resources that are being made available to CDFIs. CDFIs and the CDFI fund have taken on a higher level of significance arguably more than any other time in the CDFIs fund's history of over 27 years. It has spurred historic levels of capital that are available, not just with the CDFI fund, but with also different parts of Treasury and other organizations. So in addition to the $3 billion that Congresswoman Waters mentioned, we also had $9 billion in what is called the Emergency Capital Investment Program, which many of you are probably familiar with. This is an extraordinary amount of funding that is made available to CDFI banks and credit unions. That application round did close, and I know that it was oversubscribed, but the team is working diligently to make sure that credit unions are reviewed and that they can start processing those awards very shortly. There's also opportunities with the State Small Business Credit Union, which has incentives to have states work with certified CDFIs to deploy resources to small businesses. We're seeing external relationships grow and partnerships expand, increased levels of investments from banks and foundations to support CDFI initiatives to reduce economic inequality across the country. We're also witnessing several corporate entities launch new initiatives to support CDFI work in communities of color. This includes companies like Square, Netflix, and Starbucks, just to name a few. And in comparison, I know the earlier panel touched on the CDFI fund budget. This year's president request includes $60 million in additional resources for CDFI's regular programming. And I think some of you can remember when 60 million was greater than the entire budget of the CDFI fund. We've also heard a lot about some budget reconciliation measures that would bring additional resources to the CDFI fund under a housing investment fund, the permanent authorization of the new market tax credit program, as well as a $7.5 billion program that will be administered by HUD called the Community Revitalization and Restoration Fund, but it will be open to CDFIs. So we're not too sure when that will be ultimately enacted, but we know that Congress has a very close lens and perspective on the need and the critical roles that CDFI plays in the recovery of this economy. And I'm just so thrilled that we have bipartisan support on a number of initiatives. Last thing I'll say is, with increased funding and the growing network, much more is asked and will be expected of not just CDFIs, but also the CDFI fund. CDFIs will need to facilitate more economic opportunity, to foment increased equality and equity, generate increased impact in areas that have long existed on the margins of the financial services system. More will be asked also from a compliance, transparency, and data collection standpoint. But as always, I'm just confident that the CDFI network will stand up to the challenge. And I appreciate the continued support from Inclusiv to make sure that CDFIs are part of the solution and that they continue to give the financial products and services to the communities that desperately need it. And I think the launching of the CDFI Learning Center is just a testament to Inclusiv's commitment to making sure that CDFI credit unions thrive everywhere. So thank you so much for having me. And I'll turn it back over to Pablo.
Jodie, thank you so much. And don't you worry, because when it comes to reaching minority communities, we are there. We have not only, the many minority credit unions that are CDFI certified, but we have many more that are waiting, to participate and become certified. So we're going to be working along with you to make sure that those resources go to where they were intended to go. So, and thank you again for your commitment, for your support. You're right, the CDFI certification is not just a tool to access CDFI funds anymore. There's other opportunities that are coming up. The 9 billion that you mentioned will represent a huge infusion of capital for CDFI credit unions. We're hoping and eager to learn more about that, the makeup of those applicants. It will take some time, but definitely this is, a huge opportunity for the field. And thank you again for your leadership. And with that, I'm gonna give it back to you, Jules, to close us up.
Thank you, Pablo. And thank you to everyone who helped to kick off Inclusiv's virtual conference. The Honorable Maxine Waters, Richard Romero, Bob Trunzo, Chris Rowe, and Jodie Harris, as well as to Inclusiv's own Pablo and Cathie. As a reminder, the agenda and speaker bios for the next 2 days are still in their respective tabs, the agenda and speaker tabs, on the top left-hand corner of the conference page in the menu. Thank you again to our sponsors and exhibitors. Please don't forget to visit our exhibitor booths in between sessions. The exhibitors are leaders and innovators in the financial services industry, and this is an opportunity to learn more about their work advancing financial inclusion and racial equity. Now we'll have a brief 15-minute break, but be sure to come back at 2:30 p.m. for our next general session, Racial Equity, a Spotlight on Financial Justice. See you all again at 2:30. Eastern time, of course.